Hello and welcome to today's press conference from WHO headquarters here in Geneva. It is Friday, 3rd of March, and apologies immediately for the late start today. We'll have a virtual press briefing today on the recent visit of the Director General to the northwest Syria, and of course on any other health emergencies, including COVID-19. My name is Christian Lindmeier, and I'll take you through today's press conference. We have a big number of colleagues today with us in the room here today, as well as online. Let me start with the room. First and foremost, we have Dr. Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, Director General of WHO, Dr. Mike Ryan, Executive Director for WHO's Health Emergencies Program. Then we have Dr. Maria Van Kerkhove, Technical Lead on COVID-19. We also have Dr. Abdirahman Mahmoud, he's Interim Director for the Alert and Response Coordination. We also have Dr. Adelaide Marchang, she's Health Operations Lead for the Earthquakes Response at WHO, and Mr. Rob Holden, he's the Incident Manager also for the Earthquake Response. We have a good number of colleagues online, and I will not introduce them now, okay, I'm being told I should introduce them. So let's do that. And then I go through the ones we have here. So I have Dr. Bruce Aylward, he's Senior Advisor to the Director General, and he is the Acting Assistant Director General for External Relations. Then we have Dr. Rogério Gaspar, he's Director Regulation and Pre-Qualification. We also have Dr. Ana Maria Henao Restrepo, the Coordinator for the R&D Blueprint. And last and not least, Dr. John Reeder, Acting Chief Scientist. Again, a number of other colleagues still, but we'll get there when we get there. With this, enough from me. Simultaneous interpretation is available in 6 languages, again, in the 6 UN languages: Arabic, Chinese, French, English, Spanish, and Russian, plus Portuguese and Hindi. And with this, enough from me, and over to the Director General for the opening remarks.
Thank you, Christian. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Yesterday, I returned from my visit to Turkey and the Syrian Arab Republic. I was deeply shocked and saddened by the devastation and suffering I saw and heard. In the Hatay province of Turkey, almost every building has either collapsed or is leaning dangerously. I imagined how terrifying that morning must have been in the pitch black, the rain and snow, and the awful noise of buildings collapsing and people screaming. I visited a camp for displaced people where I met a 67-year-old woman who was trapped under the rubble for 3 hours before she was rescued. Her husband was not as fortunate. Her daughter is in hospital and may have to have a leg amputated. She said she did not know what she will do next. The suffering is impossible to describe in words or even in pictures. Nothing can convey the depth of grief and loss so many people are feeling. The destruction is immense, but so is the response of the Turkish government. During the first 2 weeks, more than 55,000 people needing care were transported to hospitals all over Turkey in any way possible by helicopter, ambulance, and car. Since the first day, the Minister of Health has been leading the response on the ground in the most affected areas. The entire Ministry of Health has relocated to the affected zones and is living in tents, containers, and cars side by side with health workers and other responders. I was so impressed by the dedication and hard work of health workers both in Turkey and the Syrian Arab Republic. The kind of suffering caused by the earthquake on both sides is similar, but the risks now being faced by people on the Syrian side are far higher than those living just a few kilometers away on the Turkish side. The challenges health workers are facing are similar on both sides, but on the Syrian side, they are facing them with far fewer resources. 12 years of war has destroyed infrastructure, homes, and hope. drought, economic collapse, the COVID-19 pandemic, and an ongoing cholera outbreak have heaped misery upon misery. Even before the earthquake, more than 90% of the Syrian people were living in poverty. The NGOs in the northwest of the Syrian Arab Republic welcomed my visit, but expressed their disappointment that I was the first high-level UN official to visit since the beginning of the war. In Idlib Governorate, I met a 15-year-old boy who broke both his arms when he jumped out of a window during the earthquake. He hasn't been to school since he was 9 years old because of the conflict. I visited a reception center where hundreds of people are living with nothing but the clothes they are wearing when they escaped their homes. People showed me pictures of the children they had lost. The children who were there were dirty and hadn't eaten that day. There is nothing for them to do. No toys, no games, no schooling. For the past decade, WHO has been providing about 1/3 of medicines in opposition-controlled areas in the northwest of the Syrian Arab Republic. That has now risen to 2/3. On the day of the earthquake, we were able to release supplies quickly from our local warehouses. So far, we have distributed more than 200 tons of aid to health facilities in northwest Syria. And we continue to deliver as much aid as we can in any way we can, whether across borders or across lines of conflict. The Syrian people have suffered more than most people ever will or ever could. They have endured and they have shown great resilience in the face of it. Their needs, dreams, and hopes are the same as all people: for health, food, water, shelter, and peace, for a better future for their children. I call on the international community to dig deep to lift up those in Turkey and the Syrian Arab Republic in two ways. First, for humanitarian support for both countries, and to support a political solution to establish a lasting peace in the Syrian Arab Republic. At the same time, I call on the leaders of all sides of the Syrian conflict to use the shared suffering of this crisis as a platform for peace, as opportunity to make peace. 12 years of war has delivered nothing but division and the destruction of the Syrian Arab Republic's proud history and rich culture. If anything good could come of this suffering, it must be peace. Over the past few days, there has been renewed attention on the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. As we have said before, if any country has information about the origins of the pandemic, it's essential for that information to be shared with WHO and the international scientific community, not so as to apportion blame, but to advance our understanding of how this pandemic started, so we can prevent, prepare for, and respond to future epidemics and pandemics. I wish to be very clear that WHO has not abandoned any plans to identify the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. Contrary to recent media reports and comments by politicians, in 2021, WHO established the Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens, or SEGO. In its report last year, SEGO identified key studies that must be done in China and elsewhere to verify or eliminate the various hypotheses for the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic. WHO continues to call for China to be transparent in sharing data and to conduct the necessary investigations and share the results. To that effect, I have written to and spoken with high-level Chinese leaders on multiple occasions, as recent as just a few weeks ago. Until then, all hypotheses on the origins of the virus remain on the table. At the same time, the continued politicization of the origins research has turned what should be a purely scientific process into a geopolitical football, which only makes the task of identifying the origins more difficult. And that makes the world less safe. Understanding the origins of the COVID-19 pandemic remains a scientific imperative to inform measures to prevent future epidemics and pandemics, and a moral imperative for the sake of the millions of people and their families who have lost their lives to COVID-19, and those who continue to live with post-COVID-19 condition. Today, WHO is launching a new policy on preventing and addressing all forms of sexual misconduct, including sexual exploitation, abuse, and harassment. Following allegations of sexual misconduct by WHO employees during the 10th Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 2020, I appointed an independent commission to investigate the allegations and to make recommendations on reforming following allegations of sexual misconduct by WHO employees during the 10th Ebola outbreak in the Democratic Republic of the Congo in 2020, I appointed an independent commission to investigate the allegations and to make recommendations on reforming WHO's policies, procedures, and practices. Since the commission delivered its report in 2021, WHO has worked hard at implementing its recommendations. This new policy builds on our achievements so far and addresses gaps identified by reviews of the previous policy. It puts victims and survivors at the center of our approach and applies to all WHO staff, collaborators, and members of the public in place where WHO and our partners work. The new policy is an important step on our journey to becoming an organization where zero tolerance is the reality and not just a slogan. Finally, next Wednesday marks International Women's Day. Over the past 20 years, the world has made significant gains in the health of women and girls. Maternal mortality has decreased by 1/3, and yet 800 women still die each day due to preventable complications of pregnancy and childbirth. These risks are increased by teen pregnancy, which affects more than 20 million girls every year. And while women make up 70% of the health workforce globally, on average, they earn 1/4 less than their male colleagues and occupy only 1 in 4 global health leadership roles. WHO is committed to addressing the root cause of disparities in women's and girls' health and to making the health sector a driving force for a healthier, safer, fairer world for all women and girls. Christian, back to you.
Thank you very much, Director General. Now we go over to the question and answer session. To get into the queue, please raise your hand with the raise your hand icon. You can see many colleagues here watching already, but we only have a few hands, so this is your chance to get a question. Sometimes we don't get to all. Today you have a chance. We'll start with Erin Prater from Fortune Magazine. Erin, please go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my question. I'm curious if 2.3.4.4.b is the only clade of H5N1 with pandemic potential, or is 2.3.2.1.c also worrisome, or are there any others that are worrisome? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Aaron. I believe we have Dr. Wenjing Zhang with us, the head of the Global Influenza Program, and we'll go over to her for that.
I hope you can hear me. Okay, great. Thanks very much for your question. So for H5 virus, there are many clades circulating. 2344B or 2321C is just two or many clades circulating. So with regards to pandemic potential, all these clades present certain levels of potential to causing a public health emergency, i.e. an influenza pandemic. Well, although the current virus like 2344B is spreading in wild birds, in poultry, into the North America as well as to the South America. And also there are many reports reported infecting mammalians. And in the recent case in Cambodia, it's a 2321C clade. But overall, we need to keep alert to all these clades circulating and assess the risk. We don't know which clade will be jumping out to cause the next pandemic. So at the moment, we need to keep all these under monitoring. Back to you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. We have one which might go into the same direction. This is Sarah Taisir from Politico. Sarah Taisir, go ahead and unmute yourself.
Hi, thank you so much for taking my question. My question is regarding the pandemic preparedness vaccines. I'm just wondering if you could please explain which pandemic preparedness vaccines we have, how many candidate vaccine viruses we have, and what exactly would trigger the production of pandemic avian influenza vaccines. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. This is also again for Dr. Wenjing Zhang, head of the Global Influenza Program. Let's see if we can get to this not in a too lengthy form because there are many detailed questions in there. Dr. Zhang, please.
Okay, so with regards to H5 vaccines, they are close to 20 such vaccines licensed for pandemic use. So these vaccines licensed targeting H5. But because we don't know which strain will cause the next pandemic, it could be H5, but it could be a different strain from those licensed strain. So for this reason, WHO is developing a bank of candidate vaccine virus so that if a next pandemic occur, if the existing CVVs are close to the pandemic strain, the existing CVVs can be used, maybe to speed up the vaccine production. With regards to what will be trigger the vaccine production, it will need to be based on the risk assessment. And in the past 4, 5, 6 years, WHO has been looking into the trigger and having consultation with regulatory agencies, with manufacturers, with regards at which point the production need to be switched from the seasonal vaccine production to pandemic vaccine production with the goal to mitigate, basically to save more life. At the moment when perhaps seasonal virus still circulating, while in other parts of the world, the pandemic virus emerging.
Thank you very much, Dr. Zhang. Anna Maria Restrepo, anything for you to add? I know this was a bit of a surprise call. No. Okay, then we go to the next question. This is Robin Millard from AFP. Robin, please go ahead and unmute.
Thank you. 3 years of study must have been done now into SARS-CoV-2 and its nearest related coronaviruses. So how does this differ from its closest relatives? And is there anything in that which could give us some clues as to how SARS-CoV-2 came about? Thank you.
Dr. Van Kerkhoff, please.
Yeah, thanks for the question. It's a very good one and a very specific one. So there is a lot of work that's ongoing looking at coronavirus circulation in animals. There are many susceptible species to SARS-CoV-2 infection, and we look at those animals, but we also look at closely related viruses and where they may have occurred. There are a number of studies that have been published looking at the phylogenetics and looking at the closest related relatives to SARS-CoV-2, and those studies have been published. We could put in the chat the link to the closest related animals. But I think what I would also like to use this as an opportunity to pivot to is the fact that we don't completely have the answers to how this pandemic began. And it remains absolutely critical that we continue to focus on this. So one of the lines is looking at the viruses, the coronaviruses and SARS coronaviruses that are circulating in animals, looking at how people come into contact with those animals, looking at how that virus can spread between animals and humans and between humans themselves, how those animals are raised, how they are traded, how they are sold. And so for WHO and our partners, it remains absolutely critical that we continue to focus on this, and also to highlight that there are a number of studies that have been recommended and are repeatedly recommended by WHO, by different mission groups, by the SAGO, that have yet to be completed. And until we have the answers to these questions, we can't move this forward. So we will continue through all of our technical partnerships, all of our advisory groups, all of our networks, through diplomatic channels, as the DG has mentioned, to pursue this, because studies need to be continued to be followed up in China and elsewhere. And the mission continues. Our work continues on this space, looking at studies in humans, looking at studies in animals, looking at studies at the animal-human interface, and also looking at potential breaches in biosafety and biosecurity for any of the labs that we're working with coronaviruses, particularly where the first cases were detected in Wuhan, China, or elsewhere. And so that remains really fundamental. And I would like to reiterate that any country, any agency, any institution, any research group that has further information about the origins of SARS-CoV-2 needs to share that information with the international community, with WHO, with SAGO, so that we can move this discussion further along in its scientific space.
Thank you very much. Very strong answer. I think we'll go to the next question. Do we have a colleague who wanted to add? No, then we go to the next one, and that goes to Yuri Aprilev from RIA Novosti. Yuri, please go ahead and unmute.
Yes, thank you for the briefing. Did the FBI share information with WHO after its accusations against China? And has the WHO asked this agency for clarification?
Thank you. Same direction. We go to Dr. Van Kerkhoff, please.
So we have made requests to senior mission officials here in Geneva from the U.S. mission for requests for information from the latest report from the Department of Energy, but also of the additional reports from different U.S. agencies. We've also reached out to HHS to make those requests, and we will be making formal requests to get that information. As of right now, we don't have access to those reports or the data that is underlying how those reports were generated. Again, we reiterate that any agency that has information on this, it remains vital that that information is shared so that a scientific debate, so that this discussion can move forward. Without that, we are not able to move forward in our understanding.
Thank you very much for this. I see we seem to be so clear today that nobody wants to raise their hands anymore, or nobody needs any clarification. So I do not see any more hands on the line. If it remains that way, we go. We do have? Okay. Let me see who we have. Oh, very welcome, John Zaragoza from The Lancet. John, please go ahead.
Yes, good afternoon. Just following up on some of the questions mentioned earlier. Dr. Tedros, are you concerned that in the middle of negotiating or revisiting the international health regulations and trying to negotiate a historic pandemic treaty, you have some major member states not fully cooperating with WHO, despite your pleas? Thank you, sir.
Dr. Tedros.
No, thank you, John. I think if we take into consideration where we started, we have made progress. As you know, the member states have agreed on having a legally binding agreement. This is with the pandemic agreement. At the same time, they're making progress on the IHR. And we have time still. This is under negotiation. And I hope by May 2024, we will get an outcome which will really help us to prevent, or an agreement which will help us to prevent the next pandemic or manage it as quickly as possible. Maybe to share with you one information, some member states asked for my opinion about some specific issues that they're negotiating about. I think, of course, I can have an opinion on any specific issue, but my advice was that for the member states to really make sure that we don't repeat the same mistake again, meaning to have really an honest commitment to learn lessons from this pandemic and to include everything that's needed to prevent the same mistake from happening. I don't think we will forgive ourselves, and I don't think our children or grandchildren will forgive us if we don't have a pandemic agreement which helps to address the mistakes we have made during this one. So that's my advice. We'll call it pandemic agreement or accord. I think we have to make sure that whatever content there is has to address all the problems we have faced during this pandemic and help us not to make the same mistake again. So if we see any issue that's raised during negotiation from this angle, from making sure that we will not repeat the same mistake again, and from an angle that we are prepared to learn honestly from this pandemic, and I'm sure we will come up with a very balanced document that will help us, or balanced agreement that will help us to do better in the future. So still we have time, and things are progressing well. Of course, there will be heated debates, disagreements, but at the end of the day, I hope there will be a balancing act that will bring all member states to a successful conclusion and have an agreement and IHR document that will help us to address all the challenges and mistakes we faced during this pandemic. And thank you so much for that very important question. And Christian, back to you. I think we have already covered, and I would like to thank the members of the media for joining us today, and see you next time.
Thank you very much, Dr. Tedros. You'll get the audio files as usual after the press briefing, and of course the full transcript then tomorrow during the day. And then before we close, one more thing. Happy birthday, Dr. Tedros.
Thank you.